Okay.
Kudos, Garrett.
Now, let's do the boilerplate. All right. Why the Tiki Room? I know you get asked this every time, but I got to ask.
$1 million question. The $1 million
Why?
question.
Oh, that's $1 million, but we got the billion and trillion.
You already
They're
mentioned
coming.
the most consequential, like its technology changed theme park history because it was the first um, uh, fully automated show from beginning to end. Mechanicals before then were cam based, so they only had a runtime of 30 seconds to a minute, maybe. Maybe a little longer, depending on how giant you wanted to make a cam. If you want to know what a cam is, go to the dictionary. Um, uh, so, how to make a show where there's a whole bunch of mechanical figures in there that run for a good long time, and lots of them. So that's the birth of Audio Animatronics 2.0. There was another version of Audio Animatronics before then for a little bit more rudimentary characters. So technologically changed everything. Um, it was the first Disneyland show that had its own ticketed Disneyland show that had its own original theme song. It was the first and really only show that borrowed from the U.S. Defense Program to get it up and running, which therefore made it the most expensive, if you factor that in, a theme park attraction of all time. But probably most importantly, it was incredibly personal to Walt. And it's one of those last remaining things left at Disneyland that really is a huge reflection of Walt, the person. Everything, if you want to know Walt, see that show. He's all over it. He bankrolled it with his own money. He was on it from beginning to end. He called it his baby. He loved that thing. And it changed the tone of Disneyland. We have to go back in time and realize that Disneyland still hadn't quite figured out what it really was before the Tiki Room. There were some fits and starts, but once the Tiki Room opened, it was very clear the tone of the park, that it was a place that you could find magic, you could find enchantment, you could find humor, a sense of humor. A little of that also was part of some changes that were happening to the Jungle Cruise as well. But once those changes at the Jungle Cruise and at the and with the birth of the Enchanted Tiki Room, Walt knew the tone of his park, and from that point forward, the park really was born. One of the things that I underline that really hasn't been covered in many books is that when Disneyland opened in 1955, it wasn't ready to open. It was not ready by any stretch of the imagination. It was an awful opening, and from that point on, people were going to show up no matter what. But Walt, that's when Walt really started building his park. It seems ironic. I mean, we look back at the stories of the opening of Disneyland as if they were the birth of magic, but no, that park was a mess. With very little to do and without an idea of what it was or an identity. But again, come the Tiki Room, we're ready to go.
And so, Ken, before we go on, tell our listeners where they can get your book.
The easiest way is to just go on Amazon. That's where that's probably the easiest way of getting it. You can also buy it directly from me, so I will personally mail you a copy, autographed or otherwise, and that you can do by going to the website that I've built, which is tikiroom63.com. Easy to remember.
So right now,
I'm going to jump in. So Carrie, I'm going to jump in because you had talked about, and this is a whole rabbit hole, so I won't go too far. But I think chasing after relevance is a huge danger zone because that then creates, I don't know.
I agree.
A lack of a lack of relevance. Walt wasn't doing that. Of course, Walt's dead, and it's no longer his park; it's the company's park, and they chase after IP all the time. intellectual property, which to me is kind of understandable, but a little regrettable. And it's also it also negates um, the joy of doing something original. So rare do we see that in the parks, where it's its own thing. Walt didn't want to repeat himself. Walt didn't want what we call book report rides, where you get on a ride and it basically just takes you through the story of whatever, Frozen or what other things, that Monsters Inc., and where you're just basically reliving the movie. Where are the Pirates of the Caribbean, the Haunted Mansions, the one offs? You're probably not going to get them with a company that is incredibly subservient to selling their their movies and their brands. Um, but I still mourn that. Again, the bottom line argument of chase after relevance, and you're doing yourself a disservice, because you're just chasing after a ghost.
I think that is a brilliant quote. That, how'd you put it? Relevance is, uh,
I have no idea.
uh,
Rewind tape.
I'm appreciate that very much. Relevance is overrated. Maybe that's what you said.
Yeah.
But
and
but
and Carrie, what makes something outdated? I say, you if you that's what the executives worry about. That's what they lose sleep over. And I will push back. That is a fool's errand. um you you have to break new ground. You have to try to be original. You have to try something new. um because if you don't, it will become outdated. You have to um what's the word for when you date something? Walt strove for it when he made all of his films. How I don't want to do anything in this movie that dates it. It's one of the reasons they a different studio, but why they took the jitterbug out of The Wizard of Oz is that was a popular dance number of the time. They knew that 20 years from now, the jitterbug, no one will know what the jitterbug is, and so they removed it. So you want to take things out of the movie that are, I guess, anachronistic. So by the very notion of doing something that is based on a movie, you are automatically building in a a timeline for it to no longer be relevant and no longer hip and cool and interesting.
well,
Yeah.
well, we're going to have this year a series of podcasts with Disney artists and animators on creativity. That's going to be the thing, creativity. And from my job, my career, I learned that creativity is a trap. It's a trap because you're creative. And how am I going to top this? How am I going to top this? How am I going to top this? Instead of using the basic marketing, branding, positioning, differentiation principles in your advertising, we try to be creative. And I think Disney creativity and relevance, I never thought of relevance, is a trap because by trying to avoid that and trying to be creative, and here's going to be our Mufasa and our Moana 2, you could just, and especially the Marvel movies, which I really don't care for, you have created yourself out of a movie. Well, it was nice having you on our show today. We didn't even get to the Tiki Room, but this is what I love. No, sorry.
We just went down a rabbit hole. Yeah.
But you know what? We always go down rabbit holes, but that's what I love because your book, like anybody else we have on the show, opens up so many topics of conversation. And that's what we love. But we always bring everybody back. But you brought up something I never thought of, and you're wearing a hat. If I had one, I would take it off. All right. Okay. So right now we are back on track and we're at the Plugola hour. This is where we shamelessly promote our guests. So
Oh, yay.
Plugola was a term from the 50s of illegal pay for play on trade on the radio. Pete and I do not get paid. We should, but we don't. So Ken, tell us what you're up to these days. Tell us what you're up to.
Well, I am on hiatus from Family Guy because that's what we do when we're waiting for the next season. So in this time, I am putting the finishing touches on the audio book for this thing. So,
which I demanded.
That's Carrie's thing.
That's awesome.
And, so it's all recorded, and it's just a last minute final edits here and there. Finally got Brad Bird to read us forward. I am using Bill Rogers and Camille Dixon, the husband-wife
Right.
Disneyland resort announcers. They've retired from that job, but I still use them to do chapter headings and some interstitial things and some quotes here and there. But I do the book myself. But I finished with their recordings, and they were utterly delightful. And I could not be more thrilled that they have a part to do in this book. They are a delightful couple, and I'm so happy that I know them. So yeah, I'm putting the finishing. Hopefully by maybe April latest, the audiobook will finally be out, and so that's what I'm doing. Heading to Japan at the end of end of March with a dear friend because you got to see the new area at Tokyo Disney Seas. So I'm excited about whatever Fantasy Springs. And by the way, there is no doubt about it. Someone should write that book. The most beautiful, extravagant theme park anywhere really is Tokyo Disney Seas.
Yeah, I've heard that many times.
Yes. I would.
And I went. First time I went to Tokyo Disney Seas, I had the curmudgeon face. I was like, no, you're not going to convince me. You're not going to convince me. And then I found myself 10, 15 different times literally stopping in my tracks while walking around that park with my jaw on the floor. It's impossible to describe how they've created just masterful, immersive environments, right down to the most mind-boggling soundscapes. And those Japanese were not going to waste a single dime. I don't know whatever.
Yen.
They spent a single yen. You can tell the amount of effort and expense that went into that park. So thrilled to be. So that's what I'm doing, Carrie and Pete.
Nice.
I would I'm going to Disney World for the first time in my life. I've never been there. Finally making it in April with our whole family. So
I'll get prepared to see a tiki room in a mausoleum.
Quite different. If it wasn't for you, I would ignore it, but I have to see it. I have to see it. I have to see Tiki Room. Okay, let's cut to the chase. This is an amazing book. I always say this whenever we have a guest on the show. I say this to our listeners. You may think you're an expert on Disney, on Walt and Disneyland, but you're not. This book is not only entertaining, but it is scholarly, it is scientific, it is funny, it is poignant, and there is absolutely one WTH after another. I would say WTH, but Pete would bleep it. But there are so many, I never knew that. There are so many. I said that. I'd go to my wife. I said, Jane, I got to tell you what I just read. You're not going to believe this. But what we are covering today, because I know our guest is so concerned about this, what we're covering today is we're not even going to scratch the surface of the book. When I met Ken and discussed him coming on the show, I was thinking, well, the Tiki Room, okie dokie. There's a ride no one goes on. It's so dated, as we already talked about. But Ken is a nice guy. He's a great guy. And every ride and attraction has a story behind it. So why not have him on the show? Well, again, shame on me. Shame for ignoring the wonderful piece of history and to be utterly clueless about the backstory of this ride and the amazing technology behind it. And I learned more about Walt and the genius he is than I ever knew. And I always knew it as genius. We've had enough people on the show. We've done enough. We know. But this shed a whole different light from another direction on the genius and what he accomplished in such a short time on this earth. I kind of feel like I'm one of those adults who grew up and forgot about the magic of my youth when I read this book about the Tiki Room. And when you mentioned how many leave in the middle, I was struck down with guilt because I was going to do that. I had to see it with Pete and his family, but somebody was bringing me something and his wife said, well, just go out the door, in the middle. And I said, no, I'm here to research. But so Ken, I want to say this, congratulations on a book that is magnificent on many levels.
I am gobsmacked. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But Carrie, I do need to remind you, don't tell people it's a ride because they're not really going to go anywhere.
It's right. It's a show. Yes. Okay.
It's an experience. That's our new thing. It's an experience.
I was told that today by Jane because I was talking to someone. She said, it's not a ride.
Thank you. Your words are incredibly kind, and I am, I'm flushed. I mean, I put a lot of work into it. I could only write the book that I wanted to read, so the fact that people are jumping on board makes me utterly delighted. I was writing for a long time in a vacuum, and it wasn't until Brad Bird read it, because he had to read it before he decided whether he was going to do the foreword. His wife texted me in the morning, again, after forever working on this book, and said, Brad absolutely loves your book. And I've told Brad this. I don't cry over anything, but I broke down because it was that wow, after so many years, that little note of validation that, oh, maybe I did do something okay that people are going to respond to. That's certainly the hope. So thank you, Carrie, for that. That was very sweet of you. I'm glad you liked it, and part of my job was to remind people who think that the show is clunky and outdated that it is still, whether you like it or not, to me, a piece of pop culture art, a masterwork. In fact, the Mona Lisa is outdated, but it's a work of art.
That's exactly right.
The Tiki Room, it's an American treasure. It really is.
I agree.
And thank you for opening my mind to something I would never consider. And the Blocks, Pete's family, they go on the Tiki Room every time they're there.
Yeah.
They know.
I think I'm shy about using the word sacred, but I do think it's a kind of a sacred space. It is
sacred.
It is to me kind of like the soul of Disneyland.
It is.
No, not the Matterhorn, not the castle, the real heart and soul of that place, the real place where, you really want to know Walt, that's where you go. And you sit there in the Tiki Room and you're with Walt. He was there all the time. So yeah, I think it's important. So my book was partially to remind people, don't F with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So